These are the 10 best tight ends to target in 2024. Sitting atop the list, Sam Laporta, last year's TE1 overall, had a record-breaking season, grabbing 86 receptions, the most ever for a rookie tight end. And I think there's very little reason to think that he won't be able to replicate the same success. Last year, he had the 5th most targets amongst all tight ends, and he grabbed 10 touchdowns. The touchdowns may be a little bit difficult to replicate, but I think he'll get really, really close. He has a pretty stable situation. Jared Goff signed an extension, so you know he's going to be there. Ben Johnson missed out on this coaching carousel, and he's going to be there as well, and that's a really big component in this. We already know that Johnson likes to draw up plays for Laporta, and I have to think he's going to continue to do so this year. Goff quietly has been in the top 10 the last 2 years in terms of pass attempts. Last year he had the 2nd most in the league, and the year before he had the 6th. And I know this team is definitely going to rely on Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery a ton, but they're definitely going to be passing the ball. They had the 5th most points per game of any team last year, and I expect them to be right there again. As it stands, in my opinion, Laporta is the 2nd best option behind Amon-Ra St. Brown. And Josh Reynolds is no longer on the team, so there should be some vacated looks. I know a lot of people are expecting big things from Jameson Williams this year, and I'm one of them. But until that happens, Laporta should remain a safety valve for Jared Goff. Currently, Laporta is going off draft boards in the 3rd round, and given his potential volume and upside, I think that's definitely appropriate. If you're looking to solidify your tight end position early, he's definitely the one to go after. Moving on to number 2, Mr. Consistent, Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce did miss 2 games last year, but he still managed a TE3 finish. And I think he's going to continue to produce at the level that we've all become accustomed to. Even though he's going to be turning 35 in the middle of this season, he's still the number 1 option on this team. And he has Pat Mahomes throwing him the ball. I know last year we saw a dip in the touchdown area, having only scored 5, but I think he's a good bet to improve on that. He did deal with an injury that nagged throughout the entire year, and hopefully he's put that behind him. And even though he missed those 2 games, he still managed to have the 4th most targets amongst all tight ends last year with 121. The Chiefs have the 12th easiest schedule, and they have a division that's going to require them to score points. I know the Chiefs drafted Xavier Worthy and still have Rashee Rice and brought in Marquise Brown, but Brown went down with a clavicle injury in the preseason, and he may actually miss some time. It looks like he's set to miss at least 3 to 4 weeks potentially, and that could also bolster Kelce's value, at least in the interim. And even if one of these receivers separates themselves from the group, Kelce is still the locked-in number 1 guy on this team. He's a good bet to catch 100 balls and go over 1,000 yards again. He's currently being drafted around the 2nd to 3rd round, and given his potential volume and upside, and just his chemistry with Patrick Mahomes, I think that's absolutely fair. Number 3 on my list, Trey McBride, the former John Mackey Award winner, showed why he won that award last year. He played behind Zach Ertz until week 8 and still managed a tight end 7 finish. And from week 8 onward, when he did get the starting role, he was the TE3. He's going to be an absolute target monster. Despite that limited playing time last year, at least as a starter, he still managed to finish with the 6th most targets amongst all tight ends. In my mind, he's locked into the number 2 role behind Marvin Harrison Jr. this year, so every game he should definitely get his fair share of looks. The Cardinals were 24th in scoring last year, but I do think they'll definitely improve in that area. Like I mentioned, they drafted Marvin Harrison Jr., they also drafted Trey Benson, and they still have James Conner, so they have some weapons, and I think McBride is only going to get better. Let's not also forget that last year, Josh Dobbs and Clayton Tune were running the show before Kyler Murray came back. His current ADP is around the 4th and 5th round, which I think is actually kind of a bargain just given his upside. Moving on to number 4, Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram quietly had the best year of his career last year, grabbing 114 receptions on 143 targets. And Trevor Lawrence likes to throw the ball. Last year, he had the 8th most pass attempts of any quarterback in the league. And as long as Doug Peterson is there, they're going to continue to sling the rock. I know the Jaguars brought in Gabe Davis and drafted Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU, and both of them should definitely have a role, but I think some of that's going to be offset by the fact that Calvin Ridley is no longer on the team, and Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk are the only 2 guys that have some real rapport with Lawrence. I think Ingram is going to continue to serve as a safety valve for Lawrence, but don't get him mistaken, he has 4.4 speed and has some major big playability in him. Ingram is currently going off draft boards in the 6th round in PPR leagues, and I think that's an absolute steal for someone that's getting the volume he is. He definitely has a good shot to finish in the top 3 again, and I would reach for him a bit earlier. I would even consider taking him around the 4th round. Number 5 on the list, Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews' season got cut short last year due to a nasty ankle injury, but from weeks 2 through 10, he was the tight end 3, scoring around 14.6 fantasy points per game in PPR leagues. And I think as long as he can stay healthy and capitalize on his touchdown upside, he should be right there again. We did see Zay Flowers emerge last year as a rookie, and I think he's one of those guys that is poised for a breakout this year, but I think Mark Andrews is still Lamar Jackson's guy. Now, I do have to mention that Isaiah Likely showed some good chemistry with Jackson last year, and I think his role is going to improve quite a bit too, so that's something to watch out for as well. Also, I do expect this team to be more balanced this year. They brought in Derrick Henry, so they're going to commit to the run for sure. J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards are no longer on the team, but as we've seen in years past, Henry is capable of getting 30 totes a game and handling a full workload. Currently, Andrews is going in the 4th round, which I think is kind of a risk-reward situation, but if you want him, you're probably going to have to get him at that point. Baltimore had the 4th most points per game last year, getting nearly 28 per contest, and with Odell Beckham Jr. no longer on the team, there may be some extra targets available for Andrews to soak up. Moving on to number 6, the Yak Monster himself, George Kittle. Kittle went over 1,000 yards for the 3rd time in his career last year, averaging a career-high 15.7 yards per catch. And while that's impressive, it also makes me a little nervous that he only had 65 receptions, and I'm not sure if he'll be able to replicate that same success again this year. Nonetheless, he finished as the tight end 5 overall, and he still has an immense amount of talent, so if you want him, you're going to have to reach for him early. The Brandon Ayuk situation is one that'll definitely affect Kittle. If he gets moved, I would expect Kittle's role to be increased this year in the receiving department. As far as a blocker, we've already seen how heavily he gets used in that phase of the game, and that's always my one concern with Kittle. This O-line has been lacking the last couple of years, so he may be relegated to blocking duty more than we'd like. Kittle is someone you can expect to have a splash game here or there. He's definitely capable of going off. The 49ers had the 2nd most points per game last year, averaging nearly 29 per contest, and I would expect him to score at a high clip again this year. He's currently being drafted around the 5th round, which I think is absolutely fair just given his potential role, injury risk, and age. Number 7 on the list, Jake Ferguson. Ferguson finished as the TE9 last year, and I think he could finish in the top 10 again this year. Dak had the 4th most pass attempts in the league last year, and Dallas was the highest scoring team in the NFL, averaging a little over 30 points per game. Ferguson had 102 targets, which was the 7th most amongst all tight ends last year, and I think he's pretty clearly the number 2 option behind CeeDee Lamb, who I do expect to sign sooner rather than later. We've seen Dak produce top finishes for tight ends throughout his career between Jason Witten, Dalton Schultz, and now Ferguson. I do want to mention that Dallas has another tight end on the roster, Luke Schoonmaker, who's been sprinkled in here or there, but he's not going to be taking away enough snaps from Ferguson to worry. Ferguson's currently being drafted in the 7th round, which I think is also a bargain if you can get him there. I would take him as early as the 6th. I expect his role to grow this year. I know Tony Pollard didn't really flourish as a starter last year, but they've done very little to improve their running back room. They brought back Zeke Elliott, and outside of that, they really haven't made much improvement, so they're going to continue to rely on the pass heavily. Number 8 on the list, Dalton Kade. The former 1st-round pick had a pretty impressive rookie season, finishing the year with a 73-673-2 line. And this year, without Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs in the lineup, there are 241 targets up for grabs. I know the Bills drafted Keon Coleman, who I'm expecting big things from, and they also brought in Curtis Samuel, Mac Hollins, and they still have Khalil Shakir, but I think Kincaid is going to be one of the biggest beneficiaries of Davis and Diggs no longer being in the picture. As it is, Kincaid had the 8th most targets amongst all tight ends last year. The only thing holding him back is Dawson Knox. Knox signed a 4-year, over $50 million deal a couple of seasons ago, and I think he's definitely going to continue to have a role in this offense. We saw Kincaid flourish last year when Knox missed 5 games due to injury. He was the TE5 during that span and averaged nearly 17.5 points per game in PPR. And I think if he gets an opportunity similar to that in terms of snaps, he should produce at that level. But like I mentioned, that's going to be heavily contingent on how Knox is used. When Knox has been in the lineup, they've actually been pretty close to splitting snaps, and Knox does have some decent rapport with Josh Allen as well, so that's something to monitor. Had it not been for Knox, I would have Kincaid ranked even higher. Kincaid is currently going in the 5th round, which I think is actually a little bit steep, but if you want someone that has some good upside, he's someone to go after as well. Number 9 on the list, David Njoku. Njoku finally had the breakout season we've all been waiting for. He finished as the tight end 6 in PPR, and he had the 3rd most targets amongst all tight ends. He showed pretty good rapport with Deshaun Watson, but he showed even better rapport with Joe Flacco, who's unfortunately no longer on the team. So I do think that's something to keep in mind when you draft him. I don't think he'll be able to quite replicate the same production he had last year, but if Watson is healthy, he very well could. The Browns' receiving room is one to monitor as well. We've all heard rumors of Amari Cooper potentially being moved, and I know they also brought in Jerry Jeudy and still have an Elijah Moore. So It'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out. At this point, I think Njoku is one of the few guys who has a pretty stable and safe floor in this offense. And let's not also forget that Nick Chubb is coming back from a pretty devastating knee injury. He's likely to be brought back slowly, so I wouldn't be shocked to see Kevin Stefanski lean into the passing game a bit more while Chubb gets back up to speed. One thing to keep in mind, however, is that the Browns brought in Jordan Akins to replace Harrison Bryant. And Akins and Watson played in Houston for a few years and showed good chemistry, so that could potentially eat into Njoku's workload a little bit. Currently, Njoku's going in the 7th round, and I think that's very appropriate, if not a good deal, for a potential TE1 that could have a top 5 finish. Number 10 on the list, Kyle Pitts. At this point, the only way is up. There's a new regime, and I think this offense is going to look very different with Kirk Cousins at the helm. Raheem Morris is a big upgrade over Arthur Smith, and Kirk Cousins is a huge upgrade over Desmond Ridder. We see the impact that Cousins has on tight ends. I mean, during his time with TJ Hockenson, Hockenson was a tight end too, pretty much in every game they played together. And even going back to Washington, he had some really good years with Jordan Reed. Along with Morris, the Falcons also brought in Zach Robinson to be the offensive coordinator. And he was with the Rams for the last 5 years, and we saw that he had a pretty positive impact on Tyler Higbee. And I think even if you look at Pitts last year, while it was a disastrous year, he still had 90 targets, good for the 11th most amongst all tight ends. The Falcons also have the easiest schedule in the league this year on paper, and I think they're going to utilize Bijan Robinson and Drake London much better, which should take defensive attention away from Kyle Pitts. Pitts is also badly due for some positive touchdown regression. He only has 6 over his first 3 seasons. Currently, he's going in the 6th round, which is way too steep in my opinion. I would wait until the 8th at the very least. Last, I want to talk about a couple of honorable mentions. TJ Hockenson obviously is very talented, but he's coming off of an ACL injury, so it makes me a little bit nervous. I would maybe stash him if you're looking to have someone that can help you towards the end of the season. And also Brock Bowers. I think Brock Bowers is going to be an impact player right away. My concern for him is the fact that the Raiders drafted Michael Mayers last year in the 2nd round, so I'll be curious to see if they actually use 2 tight end sets. With Antonio Pierce now being the coach, I wouldn't be surprised to see this team be very committed to Zamir White in the run. Those are the top 10 tight ends to target in this year's fantasy football season. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe and let me know which tight ends you think we should target in the comments below.